70-742, Lesson 10, Configuring Group Policy Preferences. We've been talking about getting to preferences for a few lessons and what they would be, so here we are. So what can we do with group policy preferences? Well, we can define network drive maps, file folder deployments. We can have user files created for a user without any intervention from them. We can set Internet Explorer options, control panel settings. We can deploy printers to desktops without any user intervention. Power options, custom registry settings. There's many different things you can do with policy preferences. When they introduced this totally changed the way that we can do our group policies. So understand that group policy preferences, there's more than 20 new client-side extensions, and they drastically expand the range of configurable items for a group policy object. Group policy preferences only came about after Windows Vista SP2 and later. If you, for some unknown reason, still have a Windows XP SP3 system, or a Vista SP1 Service Pack 1, or even a Windows Server 2003 system, you have to install what's called the Group Policy Preferences client-side extension, and you'd get that from Microsoft Downloads or maybe even from Windows Update. Hopefully you're not running any of those old systems. So what do we do with preferences? Well, when we create a preference, those options are configured much like you would if you were actually sitting in front of your desktop. And you said, I want to, for example, you open up Internet Explorer and you say, I don't want this home page, I want a different home page. Or I want to map a drive to a network share. I want to add a printer. You can do this through the preferences so that you've got, and we've talked about this a number of times, uniform environments throughout your network. You want to have everyone to have the same experience. Well, maybe not everyone. Maybe certain groups have the same experience. For example, you may deploy a printer for a manager's group, but not for the general users. Perhaps the general users print to a different printer. Things like that. So if we view it, this is what we see. I mean, does this not look just like Internet Explorer properties? Well, if you go into Internet Explorer, in fact, here, I'm going to open up Internet Explorer. And if I go to my Internet options, right there it is. Let's see, okay, I can't do that right now. Let me move this over. And let's bring those options back up. Same thing. That's the beauty of policy preferences. So what else can we do? We can create start menu settings, language settings, internet options. These are all things that we can do in that. We can create new environment variables. We can set how those variables, those new environment properties are going to apply. Now, there's two different sections for policy preferences: Windows settings and control panel settings. So Windows settings include applications, drive maps, environment, files, folders, network shares, registry, creating registry items. Let's take a look at what we can do in that, because we've talked about how we can create Internet Explorer options. Here, network drive maps. You can create a network. Remember in our previous lesson where we created a batch file for a user logon script and it creates a network share? Well, you can do this through policy preferences. And I'm going to show you how you can do this for all your users and have them redirected to a user specific folder. so they don't all see the same share. How cool is that? Configure file and folder deployment. We're going to point to a source file and have it created on the user's desktop. We can update, let's say we update something, we update a folder. We could deploy an update and have it replace the current contents. We can do shortcuts. We can create URLs on user's desktop. I'm going to show you how to create a URL. Now I'm just going to be using the default Internet Explorer page that shows up. But we're going to call that our home page, and I've created the DNS entries to work with that, and I'll show you this. So what else can we do? We can create registry settings. We can use, that's all done through the Windows settings. We also have control panel settings to connect to a database, to disable or enable hardware devices, setting folder options, internet settings. We can create, modify, or delete local users on those computers and groups. Power options. It's almost unfathomable the depth of configuration that you can do to customize the environment for your network. It makes it so much simpler. Before preferences came around, much of this had to be done through scripting. Now it's simply a matter of saying, I want to make a new group policy. We're going to drill in. This is what it's going to be. These are going to be the settings. And let's apply it to this, our root domain, or perhaps an organizational unit where we're going to target it to a certain group of computers or users. Here we can deploy printers. We can create a new TCP printer, a new shared printer. We can create power plans. You may have the default power plans on your systems, but what about laptops? Maybe you don't want that user to be able to modify it, because all they're doing is they're calling up and complaining, hey, the battery on my laptop doesn't last very long. And you investigate and you see, well, they've got it set to the brightest possible display when they're on battery, and they disabled the ability for it to go to sleep. What happens with the power buttons and the lid? They close the lid, and it doesn't hibernate. Things like that. So you can create these power plans to make sure that your devices are being used in the most efficient way possible. We talked about Internet Explorer options. We're going to take a look at that. And then understand we can do what's called targeting, item level targeting. And this is used to change the scope of individual preference items so that the preference items only apply to selected users or computers. So, for example, we could say if it matches a particular operating system, it's applicable. If it doesn't get applied. So, we'll talk about the skill summary here in just a moment, but I'm going to jump over here. Here's my DC1. Now I'm doing this on my Hyper-V. You'll be doing your lab in ACE IT. So first off, I want to show you, we talked about the ability that we can do other settings, right? So I'm going to create a new group policy, and I'm going to call it Google Chrome, because I went ahead and I downloaded the policy preferences, the ADMX files for Google Chrome, my new group policy. And since this is going to be basically user experience, I'm going to open up policies, administrative templates. Here's Google. Let's move that divider over so we can see a little bit better. Now see this one here, default settings users can override. So you could set settings and then allow them to customize it to their own preference. So initial settings with the ability that they can change. Well, in a corporate environment, that's not necessarily a good thing. For example, if we click on Google Chrome, here is all the settings that you can define for that browser, just that one browser, all these different things. For example, let's say we want to enable the bookmark bar. It's as simple as saying enabled. We want to define a home page. So we're going to say configure the home page URL. And our home page that we're going to be working with, now I don't have Chrome installed, but it's going to be the same thing, www.intranet.local. And you click OK. And action on startup, enabled, open a list of URLs, open new tab page, restore the last session. Well, you can define how you want that browser to work on startup. Let's say we want to have the home button on the toolbar. It's as simple as enabled and click OK. So now we've got a home page. When it starts, it shows the home button. The bookmarks bar is displayed. Very, very few options we've enabled, but you can see you can customize the way that Chrome gets applied. And how would you make that applicable? Well, you could simply say link an existing GPO, select Google Chrome, and say OK. Now let's create another one. I'm going to do this at the root. I'm going to go create a GPO in this domain, link it here, and I'm going to call it user specific shared folder. And let's put a little space there between user and specific. Click OK. I'm going to right click and we're going to edit. And since this is user, and now this is going to be a preference. Let's go ahead and take a look here. Windows settings. Drive map. New map drive. And we'll say create. And the location is going to be / lun-svr1. Remember, that's our file server. That's where our resilient, redundant RAID 5 drive array is at. And remember that stuff directory that I didn't initially share? Well, what we can do is you can use a variable, username, just like that. We're going to say reconnect, make sure it always reconnects, and we're going to label it as user share. We're going to assign a drive letter. Drive letter U for user. How's that? And we're going to click OK. And there it is. What about files? Let's create a file. We're going to create. And the source file is going to be on our remember we created different things there. So I'm going to, well, first off, I've got to jump over to server 1 because that has to be available on the network. What I did was I went in here and on our storage array, I created a document repo. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share that. That way it's accessible. Okay. Now in document repo, I created a blank document labeled user settings, and that's what we're going to share. That's what we're going to create as a file on the user's desktop. So we need to go / lun-svr1 / document repo user settings plural .txt. And the destination, where do we want to put it? We're going to change this. Let's go to our C drive. We're going to scroll down to users, public. See if this will let me do that. desktop, public desktop, right? And we're going to create it as user settings.txt. Let's see if this will work. Okay, there's where it's going to. That's actually a hidden folder that you can't see. That will create the same user settings text on everyone's desktop that logs into the computer. I'm going to make it read only. That way they can't change it. I'm going to click OK. What about a shortcut? Let's make a shortcut, and this is going to be create. And what name are we going to give it? Let's give it home page. The target type is going to be a URL. And we're going to specify the full path, and it's going to be http://www.intranet.local. And we're going to apply. Okay, so we've defined a drive map, should be able to create a file on the desktop and a shortcut. Now the question is, did we define where it was going to be placed? Home page, create. This is just a home page property. Okay, so this should be. Hopefully this works for us. Oh, here. Default location, specify full path. Yes, we want to go desktop. That's what we wanted to change it to. There. Okay, click OK. So it's going to create it on the desktop. There's our settings. Now let's go ahead. It's already linked, right? Okay, I'm going to move back to my server 1 because that's where we're going to test this out at. And I'm going to run a GP update. While that's running, I'm going to open up File Explorer. Oh, it's already there. Look at that. Okay, so that's completed. Let's see if we got anything on our desktop. Look at that. I told you it's a blank document, but automatically created, and there's our home page. Let's see if it gets us anywhere. And it does work. That's the default Internet Explorer page that you get out of the box when you install web services. So you'll see www.intranet.local. How did I get that to work? Let's go back over to our DC. Has to do with DNS. What I did was I created a new forward-looking zone called intranet.local, and I created an A record to point to our web server, which when we installed our different roles on our domain controller, it installed the web server as a web service. It wasn't being utilized, still wasn't being utilized, and we probably would delete that default page anyhow and not use that. But that's all you've got to do there. And then over here under IIS, you expand, you click on sites, you go to your default site, you go to bindings, and you specify, hey, what's the host name? www.intranet.local. So you've got DNS that points to the IP address of the web server. You've got IIS running on the web server, and you've told it any request for HTTP respond to www.intranet.local as the web page. And if in fact here we can do it here, and we're going to get the same thing again. It's just that simple. Now, yes, it can be a lot more complicated. Now, we've got our web page, we've got our shortcut, we've got our user settings. Did it set it as my home page? We didn't do that, right? We didn't do that. Let's go back over to our DC and to our group policy settings. Let's open up and edit that Again, I'm going to do it in this policy, even though now I would probably do it as a separate policy. So what was that? That was a control panel setting, wasn't it? Internet settings. New. And we're going to say Internet Explorer 10. You can do specific settings for each one of these versions of Internet Explorer. If we look at Internet Explorer in our current server and we look under About, it's Internet Explorer 11. You say, well, 11's not there. 10 and 11 use the same settings. So let's go here, and it's going to be as simple as http://www.intranet.local. We're going to apply, and we're going to start with the home page. Click Apply. There we go. Let's get that out of the way. Come back over here. We're going to rerun our group policy refresh. Should only take a few moments. While that's going on, I'm going to take a sip of coffee. Let's see what happens when we open up Internet Explorer. Well, it didn't take, did it? So I'm not sure why that occurred. Have to look into that. But that's how you do these things. Everything else has worked. Now, how did I get that to be? Remember we created a document and stuff? It's not there, right? How did I get that to go to a user specific? Well, what you've got to do is, in fact, it's here because it's pointed back to here. Here's that stuff directory. You create a folder for each username. So if I log off, in fact, let's do that. You'll see there's sadmin, there's T Reynolds, right? I'm going to log off, and I'm going to log back in as the administrator, not as sadmin, which I had created. So I got to do a datum administrator. RD. Now, let's go back to our File Explorer and go to this PC. There's no user share. There's no Drive U because it doesn't exist here. So it could not create it. So you can specify, you can say exactly which accounts are going to get those or not. By default, you'd probably be doing it for most all your users. Now we can additionally set quotas on those folders if we install the role and determine what kind of files can be stored in there. Controlling what is being done on your network. That's what this is all about. Going to go ahead and I'm just going to go ahead and sign out of here. So as you can see, this is a fairly brief lesson, but we learned how group policies were greatly expanded with the introduction of group policy preferences, and that we can do it both in Windows settings and control panel settings. And there are many things that are common from the desktop perspective, but just as we don't want to have to walk around to hundreds of PCs installing a piece of software, and we use a software installation policy, we don't want to have to walk around and figure out, does this person have this particular setting or do they not? Do it through group policy preferences. Additionally, if we wanted to, let's do one last thing. Let's go back into our user-specific shared folder, and I'm going to edit, and I'm going to go back into that user configuration preferences, and for that drive map, or let's say here, for the files, I'm going to change that from create to delete and apply. What do you think that will do? That will reach out to any system that has that already created on, and it will remove the file. So let's go ahead and I'm going to log back in as sadmin. And look, it's already gone. Just that easily. That's the power of preferences. You can deploy files, printers, settings, drive maps. And let's say you deploy a drive map that's mapped to a RAID 5 array on a particular server. And then you get the ability to deploy DFS. And now you've got a DFS highly resilient file share that's across multiple servers. Well, now you can replace that drive map with a drive map that points to your DFS location. As far as the user is concerned, nothing changed. They still have access to all the same files. You just made it a lot more resilient. This has been Lesson 10, Group Policy Preferences. Thank you.